Well, here we go for Cold Wars Part 5. The Cold War was primarily a contest between two industrialized worlds with divergent political philosophies, one capitalist, the other communist. However, the rest of the world was also largely affected not only by the international struggles between the two worlds, but also their own internal struggles as they grappled with the complexities of decolonization and newfound independence. Led by Mahatma Gandhi, India had compelled the British to grant them independence in 1947. But due to massive protests by the Muslims, the British reluctantly agreed to partition the subcontinent. What resulted was India with a Hindu majority and East and West Pakistan where Muslims held the majority. As a result of Britain's rapid pullout, a power vacuum emerged and up to 15 million people engaged in a mass migration. This was engaged by Hindus who feared Muslim repression and Muslims who feared Hindu repression. Now, the name Pakistan means land of the pure. And in 1958, Pakistan became a military dictatorship, but also gained support of the United States due to its anti-communist stance. And later in 1971, East Pakistan became Bangladesh. Now, back when the two countries were first partitioned, Gandhi sadly predicted that rivers of blood would flow. Violent clashes emerged as forced expulsions occurred, especially in the northern region of Kashmir. This is a region that is around 70% Muslim and around 20% Hindu. And fighting persisted until a 1949 ceasefire. Even in 1962, China claimed some of the land in there as well. In 1965, a full-scale war between India and Pakistan occurred. However, today the borders still remain unresolved. This is an example of a shadow belt, a region that is constantly fracturing or splintering. National movements towards decolonization in Asia dated back in many cases to the 19th century. However, Africa lacked these nationalist movements. Colonial powers, especially the British and the French, sought to modernize their colonies economically and socially in order to maintain control. They built schools, roads, and ports. They also promoted democratic reforms. Nonetheless, between 1945 and 1970, most colonial regions in Africa and Asia gained independence. The two worlds sought allies wherever they could find them, and the Cold War complicated decolonization. While countries like Britain and France offered a capitalist choice, emphasizing competition, individualism, and free markets, the Soviet Union offered money, weapons, and a Marxist alternative to capitalism, emphasizing cooperation and an equal distribution of wealth, with each according to his needs, as Marx had contended. But in truth, the African leaders often acted in the interest of their own nations and not the ideologies of communism or capitalism. One key example to show that decolonization was often a messy process was the Algerian War fought between nationalist groups in Algeria and France from 1954 to 1962. Algeria was technically not a colony, but three departments of France, much like Hawaii and Alaska are part of the United States. The Algerian nationalists resorted to guerrilla tactics and terrorist tactics, planting bombs in places like schools and restaurants. After years of warfare, France finally granted Algeria full independence. By that time, the rest of North Africa was already free from European control. However, they emerged as non-democratic states with powerful leaders who gained significant political control. One of the most notorious dictators was Muammar Gaddafi, who ruled by fear and suppression. He was eventually captured and killed by an angry mob in the Libyan Civil War in 2011. France, Britain, Belgium, Portugal, and other European states had been slowly pulling their control out of the rest of Africa as well. Even though political independence was far from an easy process for the African states, gaining economic independence has proven to be far more elusive. Regardless of the improvements they gained toward the end of colonialism, most wealth has flowed out of these peripheral states and toward the core states, establishing a system which many refer to as neocolonialism, with the entrenchment of economic influence of outside countries instead of political influence. The Middle East has seemingly always been a hotbed of hostility, and the Cold War era was no different. Now, mandates were quasi-colonial territories established after World War I to assist the regions in gaining eventual independence. One of these mandates was Palestine, and after World War II, the United Nations recommended partitioning the territory into two states. However, Arab leaders demanded that all of Palestine be one state under their control. Then, in 1948, the Zionist goal of a renewed Jewish homeland became a reality when the State of Israel was proclaimed. This led to the Arab-Israeli War when 7 Arab states immediately attacked the newly formed Israel. However, the Israelis were able to purchase modern weapons from capitalist and communist states since the United States and the Soviet Union both recognized Israel as a legitimately independent country, and the Israelis emerged victorious in 1949. As a result, by 1952, over 700,000 Jews had emigrated to Israel. Now, in the 1950s, Egypt was led by Gamal Nasser, who worked to modernize Egypt and end Western domination. He sought large sums of money to help build the Aswan Dam, which would control the yearly flooding, allowing for more stable development along the Nile River. It would also aid in irrigation as well as generating hydroelectricity. Nasser sought help from both the US and the USSR, but the Americans pulled their support, disturbed at Nasser's close ties with the Soviets. Egypt responded in 1956 by nationalizing the Suez Canal for themselves. This means they seized the canal from the British with the intention of helping fund the construction of the Aswan Dam, as well as regain control over all their own territory. As a result, Israel, backed by the British and French, invaded the Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula. They expected the United States to support this move. However, not only the Americans, but the Soviets and the United Nations pressured them to withdraw. The land taken during the crisis was returned to Egypt, and the UN established border patrols between Egypt and Israel. Events like these encouraged many states not to align with either ideological camp through non-alignment, accepting help from whomever would offer. They desired not to become entangled in the East-West ideological confrontation of the Cold War. The Non-Aligned Movement was a supranationalist organization founded in the 1950s, primarily through the work of the Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, the Yugoslavian dictator Marshal Tito, and the Egyptian president Gamal Nasser. The Non-Aligned Movement still exists today with around 120 member states containing 55% of the world's population. During the Cold War, and even today, it has been accused of being too socialist, especially with members such as Cuba, Vietnam, and North Korea. In 1967, Nasser demanded that UN troops leave the Egypt-Israeli border. The Egyptian army mobilized their troops and then blockaded the Gulf of Aqaba, which is Israel's only water access to Asia and Africa. In early June, Israel responded with an airstrike, destroying Egypt's air force. Other Arab states joined with Egypt. However, Israel overwhelmed them all with a shattering armored offensive, capturing the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and the West Bank from Jordan. Additionally, they annexed Jerusalem. After this six-day war, Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, but had established itself as a dominant power in the region despite being massively outnumbered. And it was after this six-day war that Israel's borders of today were largely established. Seeking an independent Palestine, many displaced Palestinians lost faith in the Arab governments, and many turned to the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Still, others turned to terrorism. In 1972, during the Olympic Games at Munich, a Palestinian group named Black September broke into an apartment where Israeli athletes were sleeping, killing 2 of them and kidnapping 9 more. That day, the terrorists demanded safe flight out of Germany and the release of several prisoners. The next day, the German authorities attempted to rescue the Israelis and subdue the terrorists. However, a gunfight ensued, and in the end, most of the members of Black September were killed, along with all the Israelis and 1 German police officer.
My father used to say, our greatest hopes and our worst fears are seldom realized. Our worst fears have been realized tonight. They have now said that there were 11 hostages. 2 were killed in their rooms yesterday morning. 9 were killed at the airport tonight. They're all gone.
This was the darkest day in the history of the Olympics. However, competition resumed shortly afterward, the participants not allowing the incident to dampen the spirit of the Games. Later, in October of 1973, the Arab-Israeli War broke out when a coalition of Arab states led by Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack against Israel to gain lost land. This occurred on Yom Kippur, which also occurred that year during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which is why it is often referred to as the Yom Kippur War or the Ramadan War. Israel quickly gained the edge and negotiated a ceasefire later in the month. Interestingly, during the Cold War, the Arab states were often supported by the Soviet Union, even if only indirectly. Now, while the Arab-Israeli War was underway, the United States supplied Israel with arms, and as a result, the Arab members of OPEC enacted a temporary oil embargo against the US and other supporters of Israel. OPEC, first organized in 1960, stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. During the embargo, they raised prices and reduced exports to the United States, the United Kingdom, and other states friendly with Israel. OPEC was and is essentially a cartel, and due to their embargo on the US, prices quadrupled in half a year, from $3 to $12 per barrel. This resulted in an energy crisis not only in the US, but around the world. These events and many others prove that the Cold War era was not simply a regional competition between the superpowers, but a global conflict fought on many fronts.